Where are we going with this? Because it's so fascinating.
Quo presents Hybrid Lives with David Keane.
Hamza Khan, the CEO and founder of Letswork. Hamza is a graduate of the London School of Economics. He's a lawyer and a graduate of the E25 entrepreneurial program out of Dubai, and the founder of a burgeoning startup, Letswork, which we'll learn a little bit about as we go on. But Hamza, welcome to Quo, and thank you so much for sharing your wisdom this afternoon with us.
Thank you so much, David. It's a pleasure to be here, and I can't wait to delve deep into the world of flexible and hybrid spaces.
Why have hybrid spaces evolved? What was the genesis? What was the need? Why has all this happened? Why has it all changed so much?
I think we were definitely witnessing this pre-COVID as well, and I think COVID has probably just accelerated a lot of the change that we were seeing anyway. And I think it's really to do with the evolution of the use of space and how people started off, using certain spaces, whether it's hotels or their offices, for one use case, and then they sort of ended up using them more frequently or less frequently, and then other people came in and it sort of evolved as a result of the frequency and the different sort of uses of that space.
Do you think that this is an inevitable consequence, or the inevitable consequence of what's happened is going to have a fundamental effect on the future of real estate in terms of the future of office? Are we going to look in 10 to 20 years and say, this was the beginning of that revolution?
I think so. Yeah, I think what's happened is, especially, well, if you look at the office in particular, it's a sort of this legacy concept that was constructed, decades ago, where people were, traditionally sort of seen to come in, punch in at 9 a.m. and punch out at 5 p.m. And then as companies sort of grew, whether they grew geographically or they grew in terms of size of the number of people, or even in terms of the types of people who were using that office, it didn't really catch on. They didn't really the actual office didn't evolve as the companies evolved as well. And now what's happened is with COVID having sort of accelerated this acceptance or the permanence of remote work, whether it's for a whole company or whether it's sort of on all days of the week. I think what's happened is companies are now sort of looking at how they can reposition the use of the office and maybe make the most of every square foot of the space.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, it's super interesting, but it's like, obviously, I want to focus on office, but it's the same applies to the future of retail. I mean, obviously through technology and the change in purchasing habits and all of this, the future of retail and is obviously up for grabs, and there's going to be significant change. But is it circular? Is that social need that you see, particularly in your clients at Letswork, or your members, I should say, excuse me, but your members at Letswork, do you see how much do you see that social need? Because that's the one bit that everyone asks the question. Do you need to be with your colleagues?
I think there definitely is a need. Whether that need is sort of every day, all days of the week, and at all times, that's sort of left to companies to decide as to what their sort of internal culture is. I think the key is flexibility and giving people the choice as to doing what they want, when they want, and where they want. But I think, especially when it comes to sort of in creating that sort of knowledge osmosis, creating that sort of camaraderie between colleagues. I think physical sort of interaction is definitely super important in the office or outside the office as well.
Do you think are we reaching a tipping point? Have we reached a tipping point? And how much is this being driven by your generation and the generation that's coming up behind you?
Yeah, I think I mean, it's too early to say whether today is the tipping point or that tipping point is yet to come, because we live in such uncertain times with, especially with COVID, with new variants coming up left, right, and center. So we're yet to see as to how sort of stretched this evolution will take. But yeah, I think without a doubt, it also, another factor that's important is the sort of the needs of the millennial workforce, the Gen Z workforce as well, and how, I mean, it's more of a social commentary as well, right? I mean, if you think about, you know, how we sort of consume content, whether on social media, and we have this sort of need for instant gratification with likes and comments and shares and everything. There's this constant need for something new and something fresh, and so I think that's also why, you know, in order to sort of appease to the new generation of the workforce, companies will constantly sort of need to sort of uh, offer their new set of employees something super exciting as well. That wasn't sort of the case with previous generations.
And that's a massive change to corporate culture. That's a massive, massive evolution. I mean, that's just a massive evolution of corporate culture, because it dials up the diversity, the eclectic, a kind of an eclectic, curated culture, to allowing the individual to curate their own kind of bespoke experience. Is that fair?
Definitely, and I don't think it's something that sort of companies can really avoid. You know, if you look at sort of retention rates, if you look at you know, I mean, at the moment right now, and the job market is super hot. I mean, if this is the best time to be looking for a job, because companies are sort of scrambling to be able to sort of find,
It's weird,
attract,
right?
and retain talent. Yeah, globally.
I mean, that just as a small little tangent to COVID, and I'm trying not to mention COVID. I just find that so ironic.
It is indeed. Yeah.
I mean, it's so weird. Anyway, but let's leave that irony for our listeners to ponder.
Yeah.
But it is, and are you seeing through the growth of Letswork, and Letswork, for our listeners who don't know, was born out of Dubai by Hamza and his business partner Omar. We work. Let's start this again. So Hamza and his business partner Omar created Letswork, and what fascinates me about it is how, two things. One, let me ask you, do you think there's an element of serendipity, so to speak? Were you able to foresee how much the worker or your members needed to have that kind of eclecticism, that diversity in their experiences? And is that why you created Letswork?
I think subconsciously that definitely was there. I mean, the reason why we built Letswork was, and for those wondering as to what exactly Letswork is a digital membership and a booking platform that allows users to essentially work from anywhere. They can work from hotels, cafes, co-working spaces, all via a single membership here in Dubai, or they can sort of book on a pay-as-you-go basis, by the hour, by the day, for whatever their needs are. And so, I mean, we built Letswork essentially with the problem in mind that essentially people who are just starting out, so startups or SMEs or even freelancers, really struggle to find an affordable and a flexible space to work from in the UAE. And what was interesting was I mean, we completely ignored like the potential of the community element of it as well, as to how you know, allowing people to work from our partner spaces via these flexible membership packages, it actually cultivated this massive community in the spaces that we operate at Letswork in. And these are some of the, you know, the best and the coolest hotels and cafes and co-working spaces in Dubai. And what sort of naturally happened was we were able to sort of create this really great sort of close-knit network of members, all from such a diverse range of backgrounds, which really allowed them sort of to network with each other, to do business together, and to allow them to really make some friends as well, which otherwise they wouldn't have been able to do if they were simply just working from a local sort of Starbucks by themselves. So that's one of the interesting things that we found at Let's Work. And I think and what's ironic is that we never really sort of focused on companies like large scale corporates as well. And and our sort of B2B side of the business is only really a result of COVID, really, because companies had their own offices.
And what are you? And this is why what fascinates me about your business model, and I'm not trying to promote it too much, but what fascinates me is the size of business and the members who are joining your community, because that for me it's a very fine indication of the mindset of more contemporary companies that realize what they need to do in order to enhance their culture, which again is kind of a disconnect because they're disconnecting that, or possibly disconnecting their staff from a permanent space, but giving them the opportunity to be in a more creative environment.
And what's cool as well is that it's done in both like an employee engagement sort of perspective, where it's essentially giving the employees empowering the employees with the freedom to work from wherever they want, and sort of having to avoid commute times and work near home as opposed to working from home or working from office. But at the same time, it also just really makes a lot of financial sense for a lot of companies. And instead of sort of investing so much in CapEx and OpEx in this massive HQ in the center of town, you're seeing this sort of this hub and spoke model, which companies globally are embracing, and this decentralization of the office, and really sort of allowing people allowing companies to really hire people from all walks of life, from anywhere really, across the country or even across borders.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, the more you think about it, because it gives that diversity and that latitude to the entity itself. So that in terms of evolving culture, are you seeing a situation, or do you foresee, rather than within the Let's Work community, but do we foresee I know you've launched in Dubai and you're now in Saudi and you're going to launch there. And I think I want to talk to you about geography a little bit later on. But if we were to transpose this into the US, into Northern Europe, into Hong Kong, Singapore, Bangkok, do we see an evolution of permanent space that is smaller with hybrid spaces, or what do you call it? Hybrid spaces or
collaborative spaces?
Flexible spaces. Sorry, thank you. Flexible spaces for some of the employees, which reduces CapEx, reduces OpEx, and maintains some sort of corporate culture. Because the one question that obviously one has to ask is, while it enhances business, while it enhances culture on one side in terms of freedom and being more of a libertarian and all of this kind of stuff, it inevitably reduces the social connection if people have that freedom. What are your thoughts on that?
True. It really is a massive balancing act, right? And we've seen sort of the evolution of the office go from cubicles all the way to sort of open plan, to like hot desking across the whole floor. And then now I think version 3 or 4, whatever, when you sort of start the count, is essentially going to be a lot more focused on collaborative space, where the heads down work is probably going to be done at home or in sort of the spoke areas of the office across the country, across the city. And then the main hubs will essentially serve as the collaborative collaborative areas where people can then sort of cultivate that company culture and bring the social interaction back into a central space.
Where's it going to end up? Because are we on a journey, or where are we going with this? Because it's so fascinating.
It is, and I think again, it just comes down to size. There's no one size that fits all. I think it's up to each company to determine exactly where that end goal is, and even that end goal probably won't be an end goal, because then it's going to evolve anyway, because you're going to be hiring people from all sorts of walks of life and at all sorts of sort of levels of seniority as well, and each person has their preference. So I think it really comes down to a company perhaps putting down a framework of how they see everyone sort of working, and then basically building around that framework to a model that sort of suits all stakeholders' needs.
Do you think? That, I mean, you launched in Dubai, which is traditionally extremely high rent, so difficult in terms of launching startups, and we know that from our various businesses. But is Dubai the perfect model, or Riyadh the perfect model, or is Hong Kong, Singapore, London more perfect for you? Where there's even higher rent, excuse me.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's tough to say, because I don't think it'll be a cookie cutter approach in each city that we launch. I think there definitely will be sort of certain cultural intricacies which we want to sort of take into account, and cultural, financial, social, whatever they are, for each city. And I guess it'll be, for me, I'm excited to see how Letswork sort of evolves or proliferates in each city or each market that we expand to. I think Dubai was interesting because, I mean, at the end of the day, what we do is we connect supply to demand. And from a supply perspective, I mean, we work with some great co-working spaces. We work with a lot of great hotels. We actually launched Letswork out of the Grove Hotels, which is one of the sort of leading sort of trendy 3-star brands in Dubai. And we're connecting that to this, this very interesting demand, which is very transient by nature, because Dubai's location in the world, geographic location in the world, because the way sort of the social infrastructure of Dubai, where everyone's on this sort of residence visa or on a transit visa, whatever, everyone's sort of moving around. So that was really interesting, and I think what will happen is that, I mean, even from a supply perspective, I mean, not all cities around the world have the best hotels which we can sort of offer a product like Letswork in, but they may actually have a lot of co-working spaces, and so the ratio of our supply would probably be more co-working as opposed to hotels. So I think it really depends on each city. But I think Dubai was a great sort of market to try it out in.
If we focus a little bit more on hotels, which we know, many of our listeners are involved in the hospitality industry, but obviously they understand that the hospitality industry has to transform, and they have, in many cases, ridiculously large meeting spaces, as you well know. So there can be tens of thousands of square meters, literally, of meeting spaces in some of the larger hotels in many of the larger metropolises, which, in terms of return per square meter, as a consequence, accelerated by, but certainly as a consequence of COVID, accelerated by COVID, these meeting spaces are now, at this moment, mostly dead space. What if we apply the cultural algorithm that we've just been talking about, the need for community, the need for greater connection, the possibilities of, as you're seeing amongst perhaps more entrepreneurial, small to medium-sized new entities growing up, needing to have different meeting spaces. How do you see the hotels evolving?
I have always been a believer, and that may be a result of being a resident in Dubai, where our interaction with hotels is probably on a much higher sort of scale than probably other sort of cities and residents of other towns. But I definitely see hotels of the future being or acting as these community hubs. For local residents, as well as for tourists to sort of come and interact with each other. I think hotels, while they're what the, they, from whether it's, from 9 p.m. to 10 a.m., for example, they're sort of catering to the needs of the guests and the tourists that are visiting. And then once the guests are done with hotel breakfast, they're out the doors and off to doing whether sightseeing or off for their meetings if they're business travelers. And then they sort of see the sudden downtime from 10 a.m. to say 6 or 7 p.m. So I think that's when the sort of the community hub for residents comes in, and that's when they need to be doing a much better job in sort of activating the space and utilizing it much more efficiently. With and they don't need to look any further than the sort of the residents that live around the hotel. So I definitely see the community element becoming much more sort of at the forefront of operators' minds.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, we've created recently a brand in Cologne called Urban Loft, where principally the principal purpose, vision for that brand was to integrate into its environment, was to create a space that spoke to its environment. There's the more well-known Citizen M's and 25 Hours and the Mama Shelters that have done it to a certain degree. I mean, I think Citizen M have done it incredibly well, where they've actually stopped my thing is get a pedestrian, a local, to not walk past your hotel and not feel as if it's repelling you, so to speak. I mean, I think for most of us, most experiences of living, particularly in Western cities, is you'd walk past the hotel and that's not for me, that's for a visitor. That's not a place that I should go. And that's the biggest challenge that hotels have. It's not just changing the spaces themselves and making them more attractive, which certainly Ace has done extremely well. To a point, Starbucks has done. I mean, there's a lot of examples now that are of places that are doing it, but they have to change their purpose and their perception. So the local resident, to your point, Hamza, when they walk past anytime during daylight hours, they're like, yeah, this is for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And do you think it's easy for hotels to offer that sort of diversity from the space, from your experience in the industry?
I think I think that hotels, it depends on the brand and it depends on the owner and it depends on the location. But if you ask me on a sort of general level, most hotels have profited extremely handsomely, let's say, from very, very traditional operating structures, including meeting spaces. So utilizing those meeting spaces for conferences, for smaller meetings, for coffee, the idea of the coffee break, and the lunch and the food and all of the rest of it and service. It's something of 20, 30 years ago. I don't think it's a question of can hotels foster a warmer, a more attractive, more desired environment. It's a matter of, to the point of tipping point, it's when will they do it, because they're absolutely going to have to. And I think that, it will be some of the larger hotels, maybe in Tokyo, that come to mind, with just gigantic meeting spaces where they have to change. They won't be able to survive because it'll cannibalize, rooms revenue, it'll cannibalize all other profitability. And there are examples of reimagining that meeting space where it is attractive, where it is fun, where it's not the coffee break and the lunch and the biscuits in the and the cookies and sandwiches in the and cucumber sandwiches in the afternoon. So to answer your question, yeah, I absolutely do think I think that the movement that has been created, that we've talked about with your generation, with the younger generation, will continue to demand fundamental change in this space. And that's what I find really interesting. Do you agree?
Definitely. I do. One thing that we found so interesting with hotels was just sort of getting into the mindset of a lot of the operators and the teams that sort of manage and specifically the meeting rooms, for example, because like you rightly said, traditionally they've sort of profited so handsomely from this whole concept of coffee breaks and lunches and cucumber sandwiches. But I mean, what's happened is that there's this sort of lack of it's either two extremes, either the hotels, either the meeting spaces and the facilities are either jam packed with 200-person conferences for 5 days straight, or then they sort of just go back to this other extreme of just sitting empty for two weeks until that next conference happens. And what's going to happen, and what's sort of increasingly relevant in I think in everyone's minds now, is basically maximizing the utilization of this space, and whether it's by short-term use and coming up with the right sort of pricing or profitability for that use. It's up to the hotels to make sure to make that decision as to whether they want to fill it up in those quiet hours with more footfall at a lower margin, or they just sort of wait around until the next big conference comes by.
I think that the market, to your point, one, the market is going to demand fundamental change, or is demanding fundamental change, and we are already seeing that. We have not yet reached a tipping point because of the capital expenditure that is required to drive that fundamental change, but it's going to have to come. And I think it's through startups like your own and others that are engaging the local community and drawing them to, well, be it hotels, be it restaurants, be it office spaces, be it shopping malls, be it wherever they are, in order to come to work, that's going to be a catalyst and an accelerator of that change.
Agreed. Yeah, definitely.
Hamza, we've already gone over time, and we could go on for another hour. But I just want to, because I think it's a fascinating, philosophical yet also very practical conversation. Before we end, you mentioned earlier that today you're in Riyadh and you're bringing Letswork to Riyadh. Rather than talking about Letswork in Riyadh, talk a little bit, if you would, about the business climate in Saudi, the entrepreneurship that you're currently seeing in Saudi, and I guess briefly why you've chosen Saudi or Riyadh as your next destination for Letswork.
Well, I mean, I think Saudi is probably the most exciting, sort of one of the most exciting countries globally right now as well, because there's this sort of for the lack of a better phrase, a gold rush really for people when there's so much unlocked potential here in the country. I mean, just over the last week, I've been sort of visiting shopping malls and restaurants, and there's just, I think what blows my mind is just the number of people and how everyone is just always out and about and just filling up these spaces, which is so exciting. From an entrepreneurial perspective, I'm currently sitting from the offices of 500 Global, which is a Silicon Valley-based venture capital fund, and they've sort of chosen Riyadh for their Middle East and North Africa HQ. So we're sort of sharing the space with 11 other Saudi startups, which are all in the process of they've either recently launched the business or they're about to, and they're in a diverse sort of variety of sectors, from NFTs to insurance tech to logistics. And it's I mean, I would argue that it's only really the beginning, because I think we're only just seeing these Saudi startups really take front and center and take some of the attention away from the traditional sort of entrepreneurial hotspots in the region like Dubai. So Saudi is a natural sort of decision for us for expansion, and we're super excited with the potential of the country for sure.
Yeah, we're really, I mean, as I was mentioning before we started recording, I mean, I think I've been to Saudi 4 or 5 times this year alone. I actually was quoted as saying that, and I completely believe this, that in terms of tourism potential and the fundamental change and leveraging tourism for change, Saudi Arabia is the greatest example on earth right now of potential, of imagining change, and the world will see the kingdom in a very different light as the years unfold. Hamza Khan, founder and CEO of Letswork, entrepreneur, great friend. Thank you so much for joining us on this limited series and for being our guest today. Hamza, thank you.
Thank you so much, David. It was a pleasure.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks.